him being able to tell the stories, even the stories of him being a hard ass and, all of the things that made him the coach that he was, to then be able to filter that through how the players remembered playing for Mark Mangino. And again, how he recruited them and how that team got built. I got an even greater appreciation, I think, for how hard it was to make Kansas football as good as it was that year. And
pay heed all who enter and beware this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. And of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner and possible member FDIC. If you've not already, please subscribe to the channel, like the show, drop a comment on our YouTube videos. You'll want to subscribe on YouTube at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN for our live shows. You'll be notified when we go live after every KU football game this season. And in case you missed it, you can check out our live reaction to the KU Missouri game on Saturday, which we're going to be talking a little bit more about that today, both the game and also in a little bit different context. We're going to be joined by a very special guest later on the show, Joshua Brisco, who is the executive producer, one of the executive producers for an upcoming documentary, which is going to be shown at the Screenland Armor in Kansas City. It's called Armageddon at Arrowhead. And it's basically a view of the KU-Missouri rivalry in the context of that famous 07 game in which the two teams were ranked in the top 5 and played each other at Arrowhead. So if you want more information about that, you'll hear later in the show. Josh will do an excellent job of talking about it. And also check the link in the description of the show for tickets to possibly see it in Kansas City if you're in the area. I think both Kevin and I are planning on being there as well. So should be a lot of fun. So stay tuned later in the show for that. We're also going to be talking a little bit more about the Big 12 at large today, because that was one of the things that I took away a little bit from Saturday, and that kind of gets us started here on the show. Kevin, is after Saturday's game against Missouri, it sucked. Yes, it was awful. And I think we talked about it a little bit even on our live post-game show. At the end of the day, if you're Kansas, you played against probably your toughest opponent, and now you're in a situation where you have a bye week, and you might be in position to possibly make a run at the Big 12, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Just now that you've had a couple of days to maybe process the border war return a little bit more, what were some of your additional takeaways from that game, maybe where Kansas sits heading into this bye week?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think Missouri was quite a bit better on rewatch, and I think that when you looked at it, Kansas, didn't play its A game. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There were some big mistakes in key moments. There were times where, hey, this guy missed a block and it blew up something that maybe should have been a little bit more impactful. Obviously, you had the big drop. You had Jalen miss, Emmanuel Henderson deep a few times. You had the turnover for a safety, different things like that. And I bring all of that up to say, Nick, Kansas still had every chance to win this game, even with not playing well, even with Missouri, playing better in that game. You still have the lead with under 9 minutes left to play. You still get the ball back with 5 minutes or so left to play, where a touchdown drive would have put you back up. And so I think that was sort of the takeaway on rewatch, was you did see that, hey, on Saturday, Missouri was the better team. But at the same time, I think it's a highly encouraging. And again, I said this on our show on Saturday night, you don't take moral victories from rivalry games. And so I hope that's not what people think I'm saying here. What I'm saying is the fact that if you're looking at this Kansas team and you're looking at them heading into Big 12 play, like you mentioned, and sort of what's ahead of them, I do think that this is a team that is capable of playing with everybody, and possibly even, you don't ever want them to play their C game, but a team that's even possible that they could win a game or two, maybe if they don't play their best, just because they're tough and competitive.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the Missouri game, and the defense really hung in there, right? The defense really did all they could. I mean, they really started to grind down, I think, over the course of that game as we kind of watched it unfold, But another thing that I kind of thought about after the game and thinking about it more now as we get into this week and towards the bye week is, Kevin, Kansas is going to have a chance to be probably healthier after the bye week than they were to even start the season.
Yeah.
When you think about Bengali Kamara now having some time, I mean, first of all, he ended up playing a majority of the game anyways on Saturday, whether that's gamesmanship or whatever it may be. But you think about having some extra time to maybe get fully healthy. You think about Joe Sip, who we haven't even seen play yet, who could be adding to the depth of that linebacker room. We've talked a lot about the defensive line, Kevin, and especially the interior of the defensive line with what we've seen from those defensive tackles. Well, they've been doing that these first 3 games without Gage Keys, and he could easily, be returning to add to that group as well.
Cam Pickett, another guy too that I think was banged up, toward the end of it. Only, we talked about him on the show, Nick, only played in 14 plays once the snap counts came up. Most of those were in the fourth quarter when it was a really tight game where I think he basically said, hey, I'll give this thing a go and try and help him get there. And so when you look at that too, when you look at, LeSean Williams hadn't been sort of 100%, I definitely agree with you. I think there are so many places where they could be significantly healthier. Obviously, DJ Graham was coming back from stuff. I'm totally Bryson Canty is a guy that was not healthy all through camp. Basically, we saw him a little bit in week 2, didn't really see him against Missouri. He's somebody that you have a week to continue to get him into the offense and get him healthier and working forward. And so they could be basically heading into that West Virginia game to start conference play. They could be as healthy as you would have wanted to be heading into week 0.
And I do want to ask you this, as the schedule kind of worked out, Kansas has this sort of clean break between the non-conference slate and now going into conference play with this bye week. 2-1 going to the bye week. I mean, I guess how would you assess sort of big picture what Kansas did in the non-conference versus maybe what you were expecting or kind of how things ended up playing out?
Yeah, it's been interesting too because Fresno State has been so much better since week 0. Fresno State's 2-1 and beat Oregon State on Saturday, and they've been able to run the ball really well. And so you start to look at that combined with the Missouri game and say, okay, this Kansas team, has a chance to be pretty good. And I think we talked before the season started too about how beneficial these bye weeks are and the timing of them. Also, Lance Leipold and staff being very, very good at utilizing those bye weeks over the last few years. Having that clean break before West Virginia in the start of conference play, getting healthy, it's going to be a good thing. You got another one before K-State. I believe you've got another bye week before Iowa State as well. And so this is a team that there aren't a whole lot of games on the schedule that with the way Kansas has played so far, you just feel like, oh, that's an auto loss. That's not to say there aren't difficult games there. Obviously, Utah has been tremendous so far. You get Utah and Lawrence, but Utah has been really good. Texas Tech has looked like we thought Texas Tech might look. You have to play them in Lubbock. There are difficult games there, Nick, but I think that KU is showing that, hey, this is a team that can play with anybody. And, hats off to Missouri, honestly. I know people don't want to hear that, but that was a really good football team that KU played on Saturday, and a team that if Bo Prabula is out there dealing like that, this is a Missouri team that has every chance to maybe make a run at a college football playoff berth. And so losing to that team in Columbia is not necessary in a rivalry game is not necessarily an indicator of, oh my gosh, there's so much work to be done.
Well, as you mentioned, another benefit of playing in week 0 is you essentially get 3 bye weeks now during the season, right? I mean, that's I think to me, with what we know about Lance Leipold and some of the success he has coming off a bye, I think that's a pretty significant thing that you stuff up by playing in week 0 to have basically 3 bye weeks over the course of the season, like you mentioned, right here as a break before the start of conference play. And then before arguably what is going to be 2 of your bigger games on your schedule with K-State, obviously, and then Iowa State. So I think that's huge, right? I think that's huge. And yes, I don't want to say it, but I will say it. Missouri is probably the best team KU's going to play all season. And when you factor in that it was on the road in an environment that was obviously juiced up because of the rivalry, and it was a vicious environment. First of all, you had the lead in the fourth quarter, and then you also had the ball in the fourth quarter with a chance to drive down and retake the lead as well. Now, with that being said, I do have concerns about Lance Leipold and some of his game management coaching style. And unfortunately, I don't think he's going to change in that regard. Like, I'm not expecting Lance Leipold to reflect on this Missouri game and say, well, we lost because I made the wrong coaching decisions. I don't think he's going to do that. And I'm not saying that to take a jab at him or whatever. I just think that he has the way that he's going to approach the situations, and I don't believe he is going to change that. I mean, he is such a process-driven guy. Obviously, Kevin, you and I have been around him so much, and he very much believes in that process. And part of that process is what makes him such a great coach for Kansas in terms of rebuilding this program to what it is. But I think it also can be to a fault in the sense that if his process says he's going to do this, then he's going to do it. And I don't know how much flexibility there is in that. So, as Kansas continues to play games this season, and we see KU inevitably, I think probably is going to end up in more games where it's a one possession game at the end of the first half. It's a one possession game at the end of the game. You need to make decisions on what you're going to do and how you're going to play late game scenarios. I would be lying if I said that I wasn't at least a tad bit concerned about how that may unfold, especially when you consider the fact that that was really what doomed Kansas last year, Kevin. They lost so many of those one possession games and late game scenarios.
Yeah. And for all of Lance Leipold being a process driven coach, and he is, and that's really what you need to be successful consistently in college football. There are some outcomes that probably, encouraged his opinion on that. You look at the 2023 Oklahoma game where KU got the upset. KU's defense bears down and gets a stop to get the offense the ball back, and you wind up going down. And that was a time where I think most people felt this game's over. Oklahoma just got the turnover. KU's not going to get the ball back. They got the ball back, went down and scored to take the lead. And the flip side of it is last year against UNLV, we saw Kansas go for it. Jalen Daniels winds up throwing an interception. There's a big return. Next thing you know, UNLV is getting a touchdown that is just huge right before half. And so you are a little damned if you do, damned if you don't. And with the benefit of hindsight, you can absolutely say, hey, this is a mistake. And I think most of us felt like, hey, you should, especially in a rivalry game, especially where you're an underdog, maybe you should take a few more of those risks. I had more issues, I think, with the end of the game where your defense is worn out. You're probably not getting a stop. It's fourth down. I probably had more issues with that than I did the end of the first half, because at the end of the first half, if Daniel Highshaw doesn't go out of bounds, if you just tackle Missouri for a 2 or a 5 yard gain or whatever, when they run the ball, trying to get out of the half, you're fine. Like it's conservative, but you go into the locker room up 21-18. It just so happened that there were some mistakes in addition to that decision that made it the wrong decision. But I felt like at the end of the game, go for that, especially with the way Jalen was kind of dealing at that point. I would have felt a lot more confident in, hey, Jalen has one play to get 7 yards versus your defense has to get a timely stop so that you can get the football back.
Well, and look, even if you don't buy into the analytics aspect of it, which would tell you to go for it in that situation, even if you're not a believer in that, I think you just have to have a feel for the game at that point, right? Your defense had been on the field for 40 minutes practically. They've been out there for 75 plus plays at that point. And in the second half specifically, they were giving up 6, 7, 8 yards a carry because of the fact that they were, really just gassed at that point. So I think I would still disagree with it, but I would understand the decision a little bit more if it was a scenario where, hey, you'd gotten a couple stops previously, right? Like you were kind of already stopping them, but that wasn't the case. So it is what it is, I guess, at this point. Kansas obviously did lose in Columbia. They'll have a chance now at this bye week to sort of put it behind them, reset, and go into conference play. You kind of touched on it a little bit, Kevin, but I do want to talk about a bit more of big picture now. With Kansas being on a bye and heading into conference play, their whole season, I mentioned it on Saturday, the whole season is still in front of them. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that coming up next.
What's up, guys? I'm BJ Kissel, founder and CEO of KC Sports Network, and I'm here to talk to Kansas City businesses. If you rely on technology, you need an IT support team that's not just another vendor, but a true IT partner. That's how I want to introduce you to my friend and neighbor, KJ Miller. He is a VCIO at ThrottleNet, the Midwest's highest rated and most reviewed IT support company. They've been in business for more than 25 years, helping companies stay secure, productive, and ahead of the curve. They aren't just IT support, but they provide data security, IT strategy, and cloud software services. They do it all, and their reviews show they do it better than anyone else. So if you want to hear about how ThrottleNet can help your local business, join the conversation with myself, KJ Miller from ThrottleNet, and our resident genius from KC Sports Network when it comes to IT, at least as he's affectionately known by us, Mr. Craig Stout. Click the link in the description to hear how ThrottleNet can help you.
This is the Payee Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Later on in the show, we're going to be joined by a special guest, Joshua Brisco, executive producer for the documentary Armageddon at Arrowhead, which is going to be coming out in theater. It's having a premiere on September 24th at the Screen Armor Theater in Missouri, in Kansas City. So you can check the link in the description to the show if you want to buy tickets to that. Really looking forward to that conversation with him. Hopefully it'll sell you on checking out a sort of bird's eye view of the rivalry in the context of that 2007 game at Arrowhead Stadium featuring a top 5 Kansas and Missouri teams clashing against each other. So looking forward to that conversation coming up later on in the show. Before the break, though, I did mention, Kevin, one thing that I wanted to talk about here with Kansas being on a bye week is sort of taking a step back a little bit and looking at the rest of the Big 12. You know, we obviously on this show, we really, really zero in on Kansas specifically, right? We don't really spend a lot looking at other teams, but I think with how things have gone to start the season, both for Kansas, some of the positives, like we talked about after the Missouri game, even though it was a loss, and where Kansas sits now, plus with how things have unfolded for a lot of other teams around the Big 12, I think now you start to wonder, where does Kansas stack up in the Big 12, and is a possible trip to Arlington realistic for the Jayhawks? What do you think?
I think it's absolutely realistic. The question is going to be, to your point from the last segment, how's Kansas going to fare in close games? Because there's going to be some of those, and you're going to have some one-possession games that are going to go one way or the other. I tend to think, Nick, one of the good things that you've seen about this team is I think that they're really competitive and they respond to getting punched in the mouth. And I think that's a fantastic trait to have. And I think that's a good sort of foundational trait to have, because you can work on the other stuff, right? You can work on your timing with the offensive line in the running game. You can work on, hey, if your running back is missing their points, you can work with them on that. You can work on timings between a quarterback and receivers. You can work on, hey, get your knowledge up about the defensive scheme and different things like that. You can't fake toughness, and you can't fake mental toughness. And so I think that the fact that they are so mentally tough and so competitive is going to give them a very real chance. And to your point, the Big 12 has been so inconsistent overall that I think that when you look at the conference, it's kind of funny because it is shaping up a little bit like last year, in that I do think that there are a few teams that Kansas is going to play that are going to be at or near the top of the Big 12. So those people who said, oh, you avoid this, you avoid Arizona State, you avoid this team, that's good for you. Well, Utah looks like maybe the best team in the Big 12 right now. Texas Tech, obviously, we knew would probably be in that discussion. Iowa State looks like one of the best teams in the Big 12. And so you have all of those teams there. Kansas State hasn't been kind of the force that we thought maybe that team would be. Oklahoma State has been worse than somehow we thought they would be. West Virginia, I feel so bad for, with the injuries and everything. And Nick, KU gets a bye week to get fresh this week. West Virginia's got, pardon my language, but they got eat shit Pitt. this week. And so West Virginia has a rivalry game. They just lost Jaheim White for the entire season, who was, such a big part of their plans. And so when you look at that, when you look at UCF and some of these other teams, there's a chance with the way the schedule is set up for Kansas to kind of build some momentum going into the back half of that schedule, which is the tougher half of the schedule.
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on it on Saturday after the loss against Missouri, but you look at these next 3 games for Kansas, West Virginia, Cincinnati, both at home and then at UCF. You could argue maybe that the expectation for KU is to go 3-0 in that stretch, right?
Yeah.
And that would put you at 5-1 before you head to Lubbock. And I thought you did a really good job of outlining it there, Kevin. If you were to try to kind of tier out the conference right now, with some teams having, gotten through non-conference play, a lot of teams still have one more non-conference game to play. But if you were kind of trying to tier out the Big 12 right now, I think you look at Utah being at the top with Iowa State and Texas Tech. But again, Texas Tech has played the school of the blind and the school of the poor. So I'm not quite ready to say that they're exactly what, people expect them to be, but they've been taking care of business. But you look at those two with Iowa State, I think right now, I guess you would say those are probably the top 3 teams in the conference, which again, you mentioned it with Kansas' schedule. The bad news is you play all 3 of those teams, and you also play 2 of them on the road with at Texas Tech and Iowa State, with Utah at home. So if that trend continues, then that could be sort of more of a tough break for Kansas in their schedule. But then you think about teams like Baylor, teams like K-State, teams like Arizona State, TCU, where, okay, TCU gets to play, the skeleton of Bill Belichick trying to coach at North Carolina, or excuse me, Jordan Hudson, sorry, his girlfriend actually trying to coach at North Carolina, and they just spank them, right? You think about K-State, K-State should be 0-3, truthfully. It's a miracle that they got their one win against North Dakota. Are they going to be dead in the water? Are they going to be sunk? But obviously that game carries even more connotation because of the Sunflower Showdown and everything. And along with that, Kansas doesn't play TCU, but you think about Arizona State, KU doesn't play them either. But where is Arizona State going to be? Like, there's a very real argument to be made that Kansas is firmly in that sort of right at the top of that next tier, I guess, would be the best way to put it. When you think about, if you want to tier it out and you say, okay, right now it's Iowa State and Utah and Texas Tech sort of the top. And then like the next group would be, I guess, Baylor, TCU, Arizona State, Kansas is right there, right in that mix of those teams. So that obviously puts you in a position to say, okay, if you can go out and win a couple of those games, maybe you don't have to win all 3 of your Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Utah games, but if you go 2-1 in those games, is that going to put you right there, right, for the discussion of the Big 12 title? It's very possible. It's very possible.
Yeah, 100%. I think BYU is in that tier too. They're another team that's hard to tell because of who they've played, but they've been very physical and tough, and so I do think that they're a team that is probably going to be sort of in that. You start looking at like the 30 teams that could go 8-4 this year, right, Nick? And like,
yeah,
I feel like it and really it's 6-6 to 10-2 because there's a bunch of teams that look like 8-4 teams, and a couple of them will go 10-2. And a couple of them will be a little bit worse than that at like 6-6. And KU's in that discussion. And obviously, you'd rather be a lot closer to 10-2 than you would 6-6. But this is a team that if they come out and they play well, I don't think that there's anybody in the Big 12 that they can't play with at this point.
Now, I will say, if you are looking for other Big 12 games to have circled, Texas Tech and Utah kick off conference play on next Saturday, the September 20th, the same day that KU plays West Virginia. That game will, I think, paint a much better picture of both of those teams in terms of where they are at and how serious either of those teams are as Big 12 title contender.
Kind of shades of, I don't want to cut you off, but it's kind of shades of last year when Utah played Oklahoma State early, and everybody thought like, oh, this is a game that could be for the Big 12, and then both of them wound up not being very. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Tech and Utah, but it was kind of funny because at that point, I think Oklahoma State was undefeated. Utah was looking really good, and it was like, man, this game is maybe going to decide something, and it turns out that it didn't really decide a whole heck of a lot.
Which, by the way, Oklahoma State fans, I'm sorry if there are any of them that happen to be tuning into the show. They just lost 69-3 against Oregon, and Kevin, I would have.
And it wasn't that close, Nick. That's the. It hurts when you lose 69-3. It really hurts when it's like, well, the other team was making sure that it wasn't, 100-0.
Well, and Kevin, I'll be honest with you. I mean, Oklahoma State's going to come to Lawrence on November 1st. It is very, very possible that they will be coming into that game with a interim head coach. Like, I don't know if it's a guarantee that Mike Gundy's going to make it through the rest of the season.
I don't know if that'll happen or not. I do think I haven't seen an injury update on Haas Hedgney, and I do think that he helps them quite a bit just because you think about when you're not perfect offensively, one of the things that can help you is a quarterback who can run. And so if he's able to come back and stay healthy, I think he gives them a little more pop and a little more punching power. But yeah, it's not looking great for the Cowboys right now.
I would say that all in all, considering where Kansas is at right now at 2-1 with the way that the Missouri game unfolded and how things are looking in the Big 12, the bottom line is, to me at least, the whole season is in front of you. If you're Kansas, you have a chance absolutely to make a run at the Big 12 title.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. When you look at those teams, like you said, maybe you do have three teams that are kind of like, okay, we think these are the top three teams. But then somebody from that next tier is going to be in that discussion. And, as they say, why not Kansas?
Exactly. Why not Kansas? And speaking of Kansas and the Missouri rivalry, we have a very special guest that's going to be joining us next. Joshua Brisco, executive producer for Armageddon at Arrowhead. It's a documentary that gives you sort of a bird's eye view of the rivalry between Kansas and Missouri in the context of that top 5 matchup that they had in 2007, featuring interviews with guys like Mark Mangino, Brandon McAnderson, Dexton Fields, and none other than the biggest star of the show. That's right. Kevin Flaherty is going to be in that documentary as well. Kevin was interviewed as part of it. And you can check the link in the description of the show if you want to check out tickets to it. The premiere is September 24th at the Screen Armor Theater. You'll definitely want to check it out in Kansas City. If nothing else, you'll get a chance to see Kevin on the big screen, which, I mean, that basically sold me right there, knowing that I'd have that opportunity. So, and Kevin and I are both planning on being there September 24th. So if you need any more selling on possibly checking it out, Joshua Brisco is going to be joining us coming up next. And speaking of Arrowhead Stadium, if you're a Chiefs fan, you could be on the field at the 50-yard line inside GEHA Field for the official coin toss at a Chiefs home game this season. Visit Chiefs.com/GEHA now. You can enter to win a chance to be on the field for a once-in-a-lifetime view of the pre-game coin toss. Plus, you can score other exclusive prizes. Enter for a chance to win at Chiefs.com/GEHA. GEHA is a proud partner of the Kansas City Chiefs. Joshua Brisco joins us next.
What's good, everyone? It is KCSN betting analyst Benny Heiss. Something hit me as I was driving to the Missouri side, ironically, for something not available on the Kansas side. I cross over. I just can't get over how long sports fans in the state of Missouri have been waiting. It feels like forever. Good news is you don't have to wait much longer because DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is finally coming to the Show Me State. If you're thinking, yeah, but I got to wait on the sidelines until December 1st, it's not true. You can sign up right now. And when we go live, new Missouri customers get $300 in bonus bets just for placing a $5 bet. $5. That's not even as much as a pumpkin spice latte that's going to take over. So it's not some ragtag sports, but this is DraftKings. You got live in-game betting. So if your team starts hot, you could jump in mid-play. There's lightning fast payouts. None of that wait 3 days for your money nonsense. And you've got more ways to get in on the action. There's no better way to start. It's all from your phone. When we go live, you'll be betting with a sportsbook trusted by millions, safe, secure, fast withdrawals, everything you want. Well, except maybe a guarantee that your team will cover the spread, but that part's still on you. So here's the move. You download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. use code KCSN. And when we go live December 1st, that $5 bet turns into $300 in bonus bets. That is code KCSN in partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, 21 plus and physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after they are issued. Excludes customers who redeem pre-launch sign-up offer. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. Of course, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And as promised, we're joined by a very special guest, none other than Joshua Brisco. If you are a fan of KC Sports Network on the Chiefs side, you are certainly probably familiar with what Josh does. You can check out his show Mondays and Fridays, Everything Else with Joshua Brisco, and of course, Only Weird Games as well. But here today, Josh is going to be telling us a little bit more about a documentary that Kevin is involved in, actually. That is the Armageddon at Arrowhead. It's a documentary featuring the KU and Missouri rivalry, specifically that big-time game in 2007. And it's obviously the biggest game in the rivalry, and certainly is a game that I think people have many memories of. Obviously, on the KU side, maybe not as positive in some cases, but... that being said, it's another opportunity to really showcase this rivalry. And on the heels of KU and Missouri renewing that rivalry, I felt pertinent to have the opportunity to speak more about that. So, Josh, I guess, first off, can you tell us a little bit more about the documentary and what your role was and maybe some of what you took away from having the experience of working with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me here. I am, I have a bingo card on my wall trying to check off every single KCSN property, and I've been missing you guys. So I'm happy to make my appearance here. Like you said, it is really, it's a view of the rivalry centered around that game in November of 2007, where you've got two top 5 teams and kind of that setup of, hey, if either of these teams win their next 2 games, they're playing for a national championship. And I'll just mention right out of the gate, again, spoiler alert, Kansas fans don't enjoy how this game ended. You did enjoy how the season ended, though. Yes. And honestly, that the Orange Bowl of it all is honestly one of the things that I think makes this really work, because as in every good KU Mizzou story, both sides think they got kind of screwed. Both sides are a little bit upset about the big picture where Mizzou gets the win at Arrowhead, but KU goes to the Orange Bowl. And in so many ways, you get some of the heights of these programs, the heights of this rivalry. So, we can get into all the details however you want. It's been a very fun project to be working on. The final touches still being applied as we speak. And I'm an executive producer. Another thing I can add to my Twitter bio as it gets longer and longer every day.
Well, Only Weird Games is one of my favorite shows on the KC Sports Network. It's a lot of fun and really enjoy you guys there. I obviously was at the game, covered that team, which is why I guess I would make a good guest on this documentary, or at least. And
you were a good guest. I haven't seen the edit, but I was there live. It was good stuff.
I always try to explain to people, though, just how surreal all of that was. Is that something you feel like really came off through the interview process? Just sort of like, hey, this isn't supposed to happen this way. And all of a sudden, the entire college football world is watching Kansas City for Kansas against Missouri.
100% that's a through line, but it's fascinating to me who it is and isn't a through line for, because if I was only talking about our discussions with the players, I would say no, that doesn't really come through. But this is why I'm very, very happy, and I'm proud of the roster of people that we talked to for this, because on the media side, you have people like you and Blair Kirchhoff, who has just this encyclopedic knowledge of the rivalry and everything that comes together and its place in college sports and how this all gets built. And then you have a guy like Frank Bowl, a longtime Kansas City sports media member, but not from here. So you get his view of coming to Kansas City and then really being indoctrinated into this pre-existing thing that he didn't grow up in. And then you have the players who played in this game. Lots of them do talk about, how crazy it was to be in this environment at Arrowhead. The biggest game they had all played. It's still one of the biggest games in Arrowhead history. You understand that they knew the stakes. They knew how important this game was, but they still had to go out there and play a football game. I think at some point you have to kind of shrink your world back down to the field itself and then make those plays, which also just sort of remarkable to hear how many of those details have stuck nearly 20 years later for so many of those guys. But that's really kind of the push and pull of it all, where when you zoom out and the players looking back now, I think by and large do appreciate the surrealness of it all. But at the time, they had to view the entire game through a face mask, and you've got to be ready to play that game that way. And even though I know, again, that the score was lopsided for a while, I think both of these coaches and both sets of players were very much ready for the heights that they were on that night.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention at the beginning that this is going to be available to see at the Screenland Armor on September 24th. You'll want to check the link in the description of the show to see if you can get yourself some tickets to go check it out if you're in the Kansas City area. And if you're in the Kansas City area, by and large, probably odds are you have a stake in this rivalry on one side or the other. Josh, you talk about the players, and I'm really curious about that. Some of the different players that you talked to, for some of them, it was their first time actually rewatching the game, basically from a non-player perspective. I guess what was that experience like to be around those guys, to talk to those guys about what they experienced during the game and then what they saw looking back on it from a non-player perspective?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I failed to include the kind of the start of the setup of this doc. And Carrington Harrison's directing it, and he's seen more of the footage now than I have in its final form. But we had Brandon McAnderson and Dexton Fields on the KU side watch the entire game with cameras on them, mic them up, and say, watch this and tell us what you're seeing as we go. And then a lot of sit downs interspersed. And we did that with Chase Kaufman and Martin Rucker on the Mizzou side. And watching those guys watch the game, specifically, I'm remembering a moment for the Mizzou duo where I could not exaggerate this better than it was, truthfully. They're on a couch watching the game, kind of leaning back and enjoying things as they go through. And the fourth quarter comes, and both of them, they do the meme. They both sit up and lean forward. And it's like they're locking in for the fourth quarter of this game, that revisiting of it all. Obviously, it ended better for the Mizzou guys than the Kansas guys, but that process of watching them kind of be swept back into the play-by-play basis. Oh, I know what I could have done here, or what we could have done here differently to maybe change the fate of this game with an individual play. Was a very, very cool experience.
We had Todd Reesing on our show last week, sort of as prep for the Kansas-Missouri game and the rivalry renewing. And one of the things that he had kind of admitted was, they paid attention to what was going on with Missouri kind of through the season. And we get so much coach speak about so many of these things. The most important game is the next one. We're taking this one game at a time, go 1-0 this week, all this stuff. And I thought that was so fascinating that, they were willing to admit, like, no, we very much saw things were sort of inching toward this climactic event against our rival. We did talk a little bit about the game on the documentary, but it felt like so much importance was on the build-up and sort of the crescendo leading to all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The game is the core of how the story gets told, but the story itself is so much larger. And to your point, like that takeaway from Reesing, I think there was some variance from player to player and coach to coach, and how everybody talked about it. And maybe the quarterbacks were looking at the long arc of it all and going, oh man, I can see where we're headed. And maybe some of these other guys were really there day to day. And who's to say how truthful your own memory is 20 years removed from the headspace you were in. But it's obvious that as it got closer and closer, that reality of this game being, again, like step one of a two-step process to play for a championship, which obviously, again, Mizzou couldn't handle step two after getting step one done. But once you get there, the entire game itself, it's almost not fair to say it gets put under a microscope, because you're right. It's almost like it gets put under this enormous blanket of context where it's we're not just obsessing over the matchups in the game, and the matchups in this game were remarkable. The amount of NFL talent on both sides of both teams, unbelievable to look back on now. But when you have it under this 100-year-long blanket of what this rivalry has been, that's the storytelling mechanism in this that I kind of fell in love with in this process. I didn't grow up with border war hate. My parents went to Wichita State, and then they moved up to the Kansas City area, and I went to Mid-America Nazarene. You know, I've got Mizzou friends, I got KU family. Then I married into a K-State family, by the way. So, I mean, I am all over the map. But that's what makes this rivalry so damn special, is that when the games are getting played, I think it's cooled down some in recent years when the rivalry kind of went away for the large part. But when you have these inflection points where not only these teams are playing each other again, but the games matter, there are stakes attached to them, it becomes, for my money, one of the greatest rivalries in American sports.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think that's how I felt, and maybe Kevin and too, on this past Saturday when KU played Missouri again. There's just something about it. Like, regardless of the circumstances, there's just something about it. And you kind of actually a little bit answered my next question there a little bit as you're mentioning it. But from your perspective, I mean, as you said, you don't necessarily have any real skin in the game per se.
Yeah.
I guess for you, what did that make this experience like, to have a chance to see both sides of it, and maybe, you know, I guess for lack of a better term, not necessarily be biased like maybe Kevin and I are, or people on the other side,
or the director Carrington Harrison maybe. Look, I mean, this is not this. If KU wins this game, I don't know that Carrington's ever like, hey man, you want to help me with this documentary? So no, I mean, absolutely, that bias is real, and for me, what it's done is, again, it's like the most annoying take I have in Kansas City area sports. This is true, and I know it's going to make everybody mad, and I'm sorry. But in a totally neutral schedule, I would like for KU, Mizzou, and K-State to win every weekend. Like, I would, and maybe that's a sports radio thing of like, hey, we're going to talk about all of them a little bit. I'd rather these things be going well, and I want your fan bases to be happy. So all that to say, what it has done for me, reaching out and coordinating with a bunch of these players and everything, I get to kind of hear their side as I'm not a KU guy, not a Mizzou guy. I want to know your story. And so, like, Brock Christopher, the former Mizzou linebacker, he's in this doc. He's got an unbelievable story, and if it doesn't make it, I'll get you guys an executive producer's cut about what life was like for him shortly after KU got the Orange Bowl. And so, like, getting that from him directly, it didn't hurt my feelings any, because I wasn't there wearing crimson and blue at the Orange Bowl. But then you also hear the story from Chris Harris, who was in kind of the early stages of his time in college before going on to put together a remarkable pro career. And you hear him get up to speed and put Mark Mangino into context, who I want to talk about at length, as long as you guys will have me. Make it the last question about Mark Mangino, and then I'll talk till the show's over. It really was awesome. And then all of the media folks, from Nate Bucati, who's a friend who I love, to the Mizzou guys. I wasn't on the trip to Columbia, but going back and listening to Chris Gervino and some of these guys talk more about what David Lawrence on the KU side, obviously, and Brian Haney. These are people who are scholars of the rivalry and scholars of their own team, and in cases like Hall of Famers in their own right. And I just kind of get to sit and listen to the best storytellers on both sides of the rivalry tell me their story. And then I think on September 24th, we're going to see those come together and really give us the real story. I mean, everybody's doing their best to represent the facts correctly, but the crimson and blue or black and gold tinted glasses are always going to change how you see things. And I just feel like I've gotten to enjoy a really, really cool, sort of largely balanced perspective on why this game was such a big deal. And it's been awesome.
a lot of the narrative from the Missouri side was, okay, this game exposed that KU wasn't for real, that KU wasn't any good, they didn't play anybody, all of these different things. I rewatched before I did my interview, and it had been the first time I had watched that game probably in 10 years at least. And one of the things that stood out to me was just how good both teams were. When you're watching like Alabama, Georgia, it's a Saturday night and you flip it on and you're like, this is grown man football right here. And the pads are popping and all these things. It felt kind of like that on rewatch. And that was something that I didn't remember feeling watching the first time through. I'm interested. I'm sure you rewatched the game or watched it. You felt like Missouri really, when we talked, really kind of approached as front runners and really attacked the game, and Kansas was maybe a little bit more passive. I'm wondering what other kind of takes you had from your own rewatch of the game.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. Again, you benefit from having history play out after it. So look, again, specifically like most of these guys at the NFL careers they had, you get some stars and then some guys who just made it to the league for a while and some who didn't go beyond the college level, but were really, really impactful players here. I think in the actual game itself, the thing that was like, that kind of took the air out of it for a little while was that Mizzou came in control. I mean, they largely dominated the game. It's kind of funny we're talking, I don't know exactly when this show goes live, but I'll say this weekend of NFL action, we got Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football, a couple of games that felt like they were pretty much salted away and then flipped in the fourth quarter. Kansas needed one or two more plays to actually change the fate of the game, and a couple of special teams mistakes. Missed kicks are always a thing to doom you. But that was the thing that I've seen the final score 100 times, but going back and actually watching how the game went, for a while, it looked like a Mizzou blowout. And then for a little bit, here comes Kansas. Are we going to get the kind of finale that this game deserves? And even though Zoe Williams got to Todd Reesing at the end, and that was the exclamation point instead of, a long offensive drive or a play to make the defense pay for keeping us around too long. Even then, we really did get kind of that ultimate payoff of oh man, everybody in that stadium got good and stressed by the end of it, and that's what this game needed.
Well, KU did, as you said, get the last laugh in 2007 with the Orange Bowl, and also in 2008 actually with the Todd Reesing to Kerry Meyer play. I guess at the end of the day, but. You mentioned Mark Mangino, and I wanted to ask you about that, as you said, kind of to let you riff on a little bit about what his unique personality was. So I want to ask you kind of a twofold question here to wrap things up. Number one, for Kansas fans that are maybe thinking, gosh, why would I want to relive, a game like that, a loss like that? Sell them on the documentary from that perspective. And then two, give us everything you learned from speaking with Mark Mangino.
Well, the answer to your first question is Mark Mangino, and the answer to your second question, no, it's a very good question, Nick, because I do get it. I promise you're not just lining up to watch the America's game of someone else's team. That's not what this is. I think what you will be able to do as a Kansas fan is relive the greatest team in Kansas football history, and hopefully be able to relive it with the benefit of hindsight of knowing how lean the next several years would be and how long the rebuild process would take thereafter, and to go back with those crimson and blue tinted glasses and watch Mark Mangino reflect on the things that made this team work. I meant to mention this from, I think, your question a second ago, Kevin, but I believe if I got all my facts right, that Kerry Meyer was the only 4-star recruit on that Kansas roster. And the rest
was actually a 3-star recruit. He should have been a 4-star recruit.
Incredible.
I've said this before that, if Kerry were in Pittsburgh, Kansas today, he would be a 4-star recruit. But back then, as somebody who was in sort of the scouting stuff, even back then, we weren't as good at finding guys and weren't as good at evaluating guys that weren't in major metro areas. And so he probably should have been a 4-star recruit, but he wasn't. That was the crazy thing about it.
And that was the only argument, really, in terms of like top tier recruits on this team. That's a common thread from a lot of these guys was like, yeah, it was either Kansas was my only offer, then everybody else came calling, or Kansas felt like Mark Mangino showed up and told me this is the offer that I've got in front of me here. So that process alone, again, I think being able to properly give that 2007 team the memory that they deserve, I think is important. And again, knowing that you do get the Orange Bowl win a little while later, I think hopefully kind of softens that blow. And then it really is an answer to your first question. And then the entire second thing, Nick, being able to, I hadn't seen or heard much of anything from Mark Mangino in a very long time. And part of my job on this was we got a phone number, and I gotta get a hold of Mark Mangino. Are you gonna be around? He's not in the area, but he was in town for his induction into the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame. And so I knew that was going to be the timeline. And so I talked to him on the phone a couple of times. He's trying to figure, what's this? Who's making this doc? What are we doing here exactly? What do I need you for? And we ended up having to reschedule on a very tight turnaround, which he was great about. And I have enjoyed telling people time and time again how delightful Mark Mangino was through this process, how fun of an interview he was. And again, obviously from a KU fan's perspective, I think you're going to find it interesting that he didn't seem like a guy who had to be defensive, and maybe didn't have to be defensive anymore. Where now especially in that weekend, his legacy, I think, kind of has been reset in the place that it deserves to be in, as being, again, to this point, the most successful Kansas football coach of this era. And him being able to tell the stories, even the stories of him being a hard ass and, all of the things that made him the coach that he was, to then be able to filter that through how the players remembered playing for Mark Mangino. And again, how he recruited them and how that team got built. I got an even greater appreciation, I think, for how hard it was to make Kansas football as good as it was that year and for those years, right around there. So I think you, as a Kansas fan, I think you'll be annoyed that they lost at Arrowhead, but I think you will leave with a greater appreciation for how that was built. And I think I hope it puts you in that space. I see quite a few KU Orange Bowl shirts out in the world even today. It's a good piece of merch, but I hope it even more solidifies what that team accomplished, even though they lost the game that the documentary is named after. You will also enjoy some of the Mizzou bitterness that came with Kansas getting the Orange Bowl, winning it, and putting this entire season in history the way that it was. And you can see it with us. It's on September 24th at Screenland Armor. I'm going to just give you the extra link here. I made a bit.ly. You can go to bit.ly/Armageddon at Arrowhead, or you can go to Screenland.com and you can search for it there. You said you'll put the link in the description, which I appreciate. But yeah, get your tickets there. That's the premiere. That's where I'm going to be. Carrington's going to be. I think we're going to do a little Q&A around there and everything. So I hope to see a bunch of folks out there. And I really think that, yes, even though it was a Kansas loss, I think KU fans are going to have a great time watching this too.
And just for those people who don't know, sorry, Nick, Carrington also did just a terrific documentary on this golden era of Kansas City high school basketball that happened kind of when I was growing up here, and did a wonderful job of focusing on so many different teams and players and coaches and really telling that story. And so if you are somebody where you're kind of like, I think I want to see this, but I'm not sure, watch the high school basketball documentary. It will convince you. I think that this is something that you want to go see.
Yeah, 100%. I had nothing to do with it, but From Paseo to Pembroke is the doc. It's fully on YouTube now if you want to watch it to tide you over for the next couple of weeks until we get to Armageddon at Arrowhead.
Yeah, and Josh, I was going to have you give all the details again, but of course, you're a pro's pro, and you already knocked it out of the park. Wednesday, September 24th. Again, you'll have the link in the description of the opportunity to possibly buy some tickets. It's at the Screenland Armor in Kansas City, Missouri. So, again, if you're in the area, you'll definitely want to check it out. I think Kevin is in it as well. So, look, if you're a fan of the show and you just love seeing Kevin's beautiful face, he's gonna be in it.
He's a silver screen. It's gonna be the biggest you've ever seen Kevin's face.
That's enough reason to scare everybody off, I think. But
I'm getting a front row seat.
So Kevin is in it, and be sure to check it out, get your tickets, and go check out that premiere. And it should be a great opportunity to again, relive, as Josh said, one of the greatest Kansas teams in KU football history. So, Josh, so appreciate your time helping us break down a little bit more of the KU Missouri rivalry and that game specifically. Looking forward to the premiere, looking forward to the documentary, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to meeting some people out there at the premiere.
That's going to do it for this edition of the show. For Joshua Brisco and Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.